Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy Jackson.
Well, good morning, everyone. So good to see everyone. Welcome to Detroit Homecoming, and it's good to be back in person for this event. And I'll take this mask off now, hey? I'm extremely grateful to Crane's Detroit Business, the fabulous team at Detroit Homecoming led by Mary Kramer, and the Downtown Detroit Partnership, and of course all of you for ensuring that we can safely gather in support of this morning's really critical conversation. Again, I'm Wendy Jackson. I lead the Detroit program at the Kresge Foundation. It's our signature grant-making program at the foundation. And Kresge was founded about 100 years ago right here in Detroit by Sebastian Kresge. And he did so with the goal of promoting human progress. So today, we do that by engaging in Detroit and around the country. We are a national foundation now. And we engage with communities that want to improve quality of life for its residents in cities across the country. You know, I'm a bit of a history buff, so in preparing for today's conversation, I was transported a little bit back to almost 100 years ago here in Detroit and realized that in 1925, just 1 year after the Kresge Foundation was founded, Dr. Ozian Sweet, if you know your Detroit history, you know this name, he was a prominent Black physician here in the city, and he was charged with murder after defending his family against a white mob who protested the fact that him and his family moved into a home on Garland Street on the east side. And that move by Dr. Sweet and his wife Gladys to become a homeowner and improve their family's quality of life really embodies the generational struggle in this region to address the policies and systems that are at the crux of today's conversation. So in your program, it was described as a conversation about wealth and disparities, and particularly for white Americans, how homeownership has been a key to passing wealth down from one generation to the next, but not so much the case for Black Americans. And we're going to talk about that specifically here in Detroit. So it's my honor to serve as moderator for the session and talk about wealth disparities and the impact on Detroit's legacy residents. And so this morning, we're going to hear from 3 Detroit leaders who are working to close wealth gaps in our hometown. But first, let's get a bit of context with our friend, Dr. Andre Perry, who is the Senior Fellow with the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution and a nationally respected commentator on race, structural equality, and education. So welcome, Andre, to Detroit Homecoming.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was telling Andre a little bit a few minutes ago about I feel a little bad about the kind of whirlwind tour that he's taken of Michigan in the last several days. He's just arrived to Detroit from Mackinac Island during not the best weather, but we're so thrilled to welcome you to Detroit and to the D. And I believe this is your first appearance at Homecoming.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So we're going to talk about his new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And hopefully you've gotten a copy, but if not, we'll make sure that we can get you a copy. And one of the things that struck me about the book, Andre, is that you really talk about the country through the lens of Black cities. But the story is really rooted, or at least part of it's rooted in Detroit. And you said once, I heard you say once that you learned about family in Detroit.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your story and why it compelled you to write this book about home values.
Yeah, I'm first of all, thank you, Wendy, for interviewing me. Growing up, as the story was told to me, I was informally adopted by this older woman in Pittsburgh in a place called Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a black majority municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on three sides. And right now, the home is boarded up. It's abandoned. It's been abandoned for years. And one of the things I wanted to do with this book is understand how I got there and why this home is abandoned and essentially worth $0. And so I started doing an investigation of my family. As it was told to me, a deal was made between my maternal grandmother and Elsie Boyd, the woman I call Mom, that she would take me in when I was born, and that happened. One of the factors that led to that, my father was a heroin addict from Detroit. He moved from Detroit to Pittsburgh for work, but he ended up getting addicted to heroin, actually going back to Detroit. And all throughout my life, I heard that he made bad choices. He was probably abusive to my mother. So I wanted to look at the overall socioeconomic conditions that surrounded those choices, the built environment. So I studied where they lived, and not to save a long history lesson, he lived in areas that were redlined, that highway construction barreled through his community, so he's displaced, urban renewal, or the failures of that policy, those policies. Obviously, in this area, you have racial housing covenants, so he couldn't necessarily leave the area. So I started looking at the impact of those policy decisions. And what I found is that, so we started looking at home values in black majority neighborhoods where the share of the black population is 50% or higher, and comparing them to areas where the share of the black population is 1% or less. And most people will intuitively know that homes in black neighborhoods are valued less, but they'll say that's because of education, that's because of crime. But those are things you can control for in a study, and that's what we did. We controlled for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what we found is that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about $156 billion in lost equity. Same is true here in the Detroit metro, where they're devalued about 23%, $24,000 per home, billions lost from equity. Now, I say all that to say, when things go wrong in black communities, we blame black people. And this is why I say all the time that there's nothing wrong with black people that ending racism can't solve. When we address the structures, yeah, you can give that a hand. When you address the structures that influence behavior, that influence choices, then you are really trying to change something. So what I try to do with this book, and quite frankly, what I'm trying to do here in Detroit is, one, redeem my father's story by addressing the structural barriers that prohibit the kind of investments needed in order to yield the kind of economic growth we deserve.
So we just heard a conversation with Jim Farley about the investments that Ford is making in the southwest Tortown part of Detroit, which will impact the whole city, the region, and probably the nation. And I like to think that that session and this session go well together because of the unfinished business that you're talking about. So those kinds of investments that are going to, dramatically change the face of our community and bring prosperity and wealth, it has to, expand for everyone. And so in this kind of conversation about unfinished business, I wanted to pull a little bit out of your book and have you talk about the role of buying a home and how that appreciates in value, allowing a family to build wealth. And then how do you see that playing out now in the context of what we see in Detroit, where we have significant investment in many areas, but we still have this underlying set of structural issues?
Yeah, in this country, we see the white median wealth as being 170,000 compared to black median wealth of 17,000, 17 times. A lot of that derived from unpaid labor from slavery, but a lot of that also occurred because of discriminatory housing policy, particularly in the 30s. A lot of people are starting to understand the impacts of the homeowners loan, the federally backed homeowners loan corporation, and redlining, how it prohibited the kinds of investments we deserve. And by the way, I do talk about investments in a very economic term, but I was talking with Rob Johnson, who's here in the crowd of the Institute for New Economic Thinking, about this is not just about making an economic case. This is about making a moral case. We should be investing in places regardless because it's the right thing to do. We've built an entire economy on growth, realizing there's multiple ways to have growth. We can have growth through exclusivity, or we can have growth that is more inclusive. And so what I'm proposing is, I generally try to quantify the black tax, the penalty for living in black neighborhoods, so that we can eventually restore the value that's extracted from racism. But certainly there's an economic case to be made. You create homeowners, they help, they accumulate wealth, they pass on wealth to families, they can start businesses, because we know most businesses are started with the equity in their homes. You see the domino effect when we invest in black people. But I just want to be clear. Black people in Detroit deserve investment, regardless of the return. And this is about whether or not we have the courage to do the right thing, to understand that for too long, we've built an economy, and we can define economies any way you want. But we have defined an economy based on exclusivity, based on taking advantage of labor. And there is another way. We can continue to do that. And we sometimes hear the rhetoric. Look at the growth of Detroit. Oh, let's go under the hood. Let's see who's really benefiting. Let's see who's getting the contracts that really propel economic growth. Let's really look at the businesses that are being created, not the gig economy jobs. And certainly I will never disrespect barber shops and neighborhood-facing businesses. But at some point, you have to scale up these 10 employee firms to 50, and those 50 employee firms to 100. And that's not happening because we've deemed some people worthy of certain dollar amounts of investment and some people not. And so for me, I want to be clear, I'm at the Brookings Institution, so I talk a lot about economics all the time. But I don't want that to be a distraction for what is the opportunity that you have before us to do the right thing. And it can have strong economic benefits, but it's come to a place now we cannot continue to cower from doing the right thing.
So in doing the right thing, and I think we have a few more minutes before we bring out the reaction panel, I want you to talk about your work at Brookings, and you're launching or have launched a $1 Million Innovation Challenge. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when we worked on this issue of devaluation, oftentimes, and by the way, there's significant work being done on the appraisal side of this issue. The GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises of Freddie and Fannie, Freddie actually just did this incredible study on appraisers. Partially, somewhat a result of our work, we've had numerous state, local, federal policies enacted because of this work. But I say all the time, we're not going to find solutions sitting at a desk at Brookings or in the muckety mucks of the world. We need to find innovators that are proximate to the problem, people in Detroit who actually have ideas that are worthy of investment. So I'm working with the Ashoka organization. We just launched $1 million challenge to invite people to offer their solutions. We're going to vet those solutions, and then we're going to give 5, 6, if you will, winners. But we also are giving local prizes as well, making sure local folks get something for participating. But the point is to recognize the talent that is right here in Detroit. Because I know, and we're going to go last second, that too often we seek the advice from people like me. And look, I do have roots in Detroit. My family is from here. I just found my sister a few weeks ago living here. So, and it's just personal for me to be here. But we've got to incentivize the talent in Detroit, the people who have not received the investment. So this Google Brookings, Ashoka, and get more information. And I'm hoping you know folks who want to participate in this challenge.
Thank you, Andre. You're going to continue to
Yes.
join us as we bring out the panel and talking about talent in Detroit. Let's have our panel join us. So while they're setting up, I'll just do a quick introduction. Really excited to be joined by Anika Goss, the CEO of Detroit Future City, to my far right, your far left. We're also joined by Sonia Mays, who is the Executive Director of Develop Detroit. And to my left, your right, far right, is City Council Member Scott Benson. So welcome. So Anika, I want to start with you because earlier this year, you and your team at Detroit Future City released a groundbreaking report, the State of Economic Equity in Detroit. It was just a seismic launch. And there were so many important findings as we talk about this issue of unfinished business, or as Dr. Perry indicated, looking under the hood and making sure that our structures and practices and policies are improving, as well as some of the more headline-grabbing investments across the city. So one of the things I hoped you would kind of kick us off with is, you talked about in the report the need to focus on economic equity and doing that across multiple sectors for shared prosperity. But I think one of the shocking findings was about the number of neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods, that we've lost in the city. So could you talk about that and the implications for the city as we kind of look to the future?
Thanks, Wendy. One of the things that I think really concerned us was over the past 10 years, we have lost 19 middle-class neighborhoods in Detroit. And so we are down to 11 middle-class neighborhoods. And I think what's even more concerning about that is the difference between African-American households and white households that are actually living in those neighborhoods. So 72% of white Detroit households are living in these middle-class neighborhoods, and only 5% of Detroiters are living in middle-class neighborhoods. Now, Detroit is 77% African-American. 54% of African-American middle-class households live outside of Detroit. So I think to Andre's point and to the discussion that you all were having earlier is that we have gotten this far and managed to not be able to create an environment here in Detroit that would support the growth and opportunity for prosperity for African-American families and residents here in Detroit. People are not seeing Detroit as a place to grow and flourish. And I think that has become one of the largest problems that we have. If we only have 11 neighborhoods that are middle class, and the rest of the city, and the only neighborhoods that are growing are also neighborhoods where there's the highest concentration of white upper middle class households, we have to really rethink how we make investments. What are we getting? What is Detroit's return on investment when we make decisions about where to place these investments? And what are we expecting for Detroiters, as Detroiters, for how we grow and change?
So, Andre, I heard you and Anika at Mackinac kind of go back and forth and talk about this, and I thought it'd be good to bring you in again because you heard those stats and talked about seeing that as a beacon based on your work nationally for the kinds of, I think, challenges that we still have in the city of providing those kinds of opportunities that root people into the city more. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that it's become clear, when I hear middle-class neighborhood, I hear that a neighborhood with all the accoutrement that will enable someone to progress socioeconomically, to incite economic and social mobility. And those are basic things, very basic things. Good infrastructure, good schools, good wealth development, good rates of home ownership, good mobility. But some of those things you don't necessarily need. You have to be wealthy to achieve. If you have low wealth, you should be able to have those things. And so this is the trap, is that we don't want to say that you have to own a home in order to get good health care. You have to own a home in order to get a good education. But however, we must provide quality housing, quality education, quality infrastructure, and that will propel people to root themselves in community and develop middle-class neighborhoods. And so there are real barriers. When I see people or people leaving areas, what it's telling you is that people don't have their basic needs being met. And so I'm also just very passionate about making sure every neighborhood has what we deem a middle-class neighborhood to be, and also investing in the people. You're not going to develop middle-class neighborhoods by simply recruiting people in them and then displacing poor people out of them. That when we invest in the people in neighborhoods, creating middle-class neighborhoods, providing the kind of basics in them, we'll see the kind of growth all of Detroit deserves. But right now, it is clear that people leaving neighborhoods is a sign that investments aren't being made in very basic things. And also the rhetoric around always, let's recruit people back. That's not you're not going to gentrify your way to prosperity. You will develop. Nothing grows without investment. Nothing. I don't care who you are. So if we don't see growth, it means we're not seeing investment.
So Scott, you wrote an op-ed that spoke directly to this. And let's turn to you now, because I want to lift up and have you talk about some of the policies and investments from your seat on council that we need to be considering as a city.
Wendy, number one, thank you, and then thank you to Ms. Kramer for the invitation today. So it is so critical that we make these investments into our communities. And the more you hear about how to grow the middle class, housing is part of that. Quality of life is part of that, and infrastructure is part of that as well, and small businesses. Number one, if you look at Washington, D.C., they would say, yeah, we gentrified our way into more prominent neighborhoods, but you also displaced and lost the Black middle class and Black families in Washington, D.C. So we can bring more people in, and in the city of Detroit, we're going to have to. Over the last 70 years, we've lost 1.1 million people in the city of Detroit. That's almost 2/3 of our populace. So it also speaks to the fact we have not implemented policies or investment that have attracted the middle class, and actually probably run them out. And so what do we need to do? We need to have access to housing. Although people in the middle class and My definition will be between about $80,000 and $130,000 would be a middle-class family. Now, middle-class family, $130,000, family of four, two dual incomes, and two kids. You're not wealthy. You're eating every day, but you're not wealthy, and you're probably some challenges to pay the bills and do things that you want for your family. Why not invest in those families as well? So in the city of Detroit, we've done a couple of things. So this past year, we implemented the neighborhood enterprise zone. We revamped that, we changed that, we made it more equitable throughout the city of Detroit, not just in our wealthy neighborhoods and some of our more challenged neighborhoods as well, but now you see a greater level of tax savings throughout the entire city. The state caps it at 15%, and so we use 15% throughout the city of Detroit, and we made it more equitable throughout all of our districts. We also now have a Motor City Match, where we're investing in small businesses. That's nothing new. If I'm not mistaken, Ms. Goss, when she was with the former mayor's office, they were doing the very same thing. We were investing in small businesses because small businesses hire local. We're also looking at how do we invest in our infrastructure. If after every heavy rain, you have to rip out your entire basement, why would you locate in the city of Detroit? We have to modernize our infrastructure. And then when it comes to middle-class families, we also need to do a deeper dive when it comes to subsidy for our low-income families. We have to move them out of poverty, but we also have to maintain our middle-class families and import other middle-class families to be in the city of Detroit. And that's safety, perceived or real, that's education, and it's going to be the quality of life issues. And so when you talk to people who don't locate in the city of Detroit, amenities are what they talk about. When I talk to my friends who have the chance to move back to Detroit, and their wives say, I like conveniences and amenities, and they move out to the suburbs. There's nothing I can do about that. And so as a policymaker, I've got to make sure that we're implementing policies that speak to people, that Black families feel comfortable being here. Because right now, if I go to talk to some of my suburbanite leaders, they're going to say, Scott, I've got all of your Black middle-class families. They are now paying my taxes, and we are doing well in the suburbs. I need to make sure that I can attract, keep, and grow my middle class right here in the city of Detroit. And those are policy implications. And how do we invest in our people?
So I want to kind of bridge the policy and on-the-ground implementation. And Sonia, at Develop Detroit, you're seeing this play out literally block by block, house by house, as you develop and make investments to develop and redevelop homes here in the city. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing? And I think we were all struck by the fact that you're seeing that market rate housing in particular is, it's moving, but building affordable housing is a challenge.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. And I should say, I really don't envy the tough task that policymakers have around community development and community investment. This work really does operate in this big ecosystem that's connected in ways that are not necessarily obvious even to people who are practitioners on a day-to-day basis. So I spend the vast majority of my time thinking about how I can drive as much investment as possible to neighborhoods like the ones that Anika referenced and talks about in her report. And about 3 years ago, my nonprofit, which I run a real estate development company that is intentionally set up as a nonprofit. So we can do big $40 million projects, or we can build houses, and we do everything in between. And about 3 years ago, my firm, Develop Detroit, took on a pilot project in the North End. This is one of Detroit's most historic neighborhoods. It's where many Black families got their first opportunity at home ownership. I'm sure many of you know that. And we went into this neighborhood with a few operating theses. The first was we really wanted to make a statement more broadly about the importance of having neighborhoods that are accessible and inclusive for everybody. So it shouldn't matter what you make. You should pick your neighborhood for where you want to live, and there should be housing that's available to you. And so that's one of our guiding principles. And the other is that there has to be a path to home ownership in every neighborhood. So we set out, we revitalized and or built 30 new homes. And we thought that we were gonna have a really hard time selling these homes, right? Because the then thesis was that nobody wants to buy a $200,000, $300,000 house in a neighborhood like the North End. And the exact opposite happened. We were selling houses, newly built houses, nice modern houses, for north of $250,000, well above the comps in that existed in that neighborhood. And at first we were pleasantly surprised, but when we realized that our homes were not that our Black families were not interested in these homes, it actually, for me, it caused a moment of panic, right? Because the last thing you want to do is go into a neighborhood like this and be an obvious gentrifier. And so as a practitioner, kind of as I think about how to operate in this really complicated landscape, the place that I'm moving my organization to really get at this now is to actually and concretely center the Black middle class in everything we do. And so, and I don't think there's another way to kind of get at it, given all of the different forces that are at play.
So definitely connects to your research and findings around investing in Black families, in places, in Black cities in particular.
And I want people to see the connection, the role of a council person in the city planning area is critical, because we have got to rezone for affordability and density. At the same time, we need to find new loan products, because currently in Detroit, you actually have thousands of properties that are would be available for low-income residents if they were backed with a certain mortgage product. I mean, and so what we're trying to do now is really to create, not to get too technical, but instead of moving from these chattel mortgages type situations, but something for under $100,000, because we also see that people's rent could be a mortgage. I mean, we understand that. And so we need new products, but we also really need to work with zoning, because this is what happens when people start talking about changing the single family zoning paradigm. Oh, people go, oh no, we can't do that. We can't do that, in spite of the benefits, because we've been sort of seduced with this idea that comes straight out of segregation. Single family zoning ordinances were created to keep Black people out. And so we've got to, again, where the built environment is built to exclude. We need to create a built environment that can create the kind of home ownership products that will enable greater home ownership. And just one other caveat. Black people are actually, when we do have positive net worth, we are over-indexed in home ownership and business ownership. But when you're talking about the stock market, the 401ks, those things are important too, because what you saw in the housing crisis is stripped all our wealth. So we also need a conversation about wealth development in the Black community overall. But I also want to say that there is a connection with zoning and what you're trying to do, what you're talking about. There's a connection, and gentrification. These things are all tied up.
We're out of time, but I want to. I know,
Yeah.
but why don't we, real quick, just Anika, you were gonna
I just wanted to jump in really quickly, because it's such an important point that if we pivot to wealth, right, and wealth generation, it's more than, we need higher wages in Detroit, but we also need a conversation about what wealth building means, business ownership, and then the real estate for that business ownership, right? So then commercial corridor ownership. We do need these investments. White households invest twice as much. They have their non-wage taxable income is twice what it is in Detroit.
So we're going to close out with the concept of a pivot to wealth. And thank you so much. I know we just scratched the surface, but this is the point of homecoming, to kind of spark the interest and have conversations amongst yourselves and with the panelists throughout your time. So Scott, Andre, Sonia, Anika, thank you so much.
And Wendy.
Wendy, yes.
And please make sure that we connect with you on Know Your Price. A lot of what we're talking about is in Andre's book, and Detroit Future City will continue these conversations in Detroit and external to Detroit. So thank you.